Welcome to the Well Mind Podcast, a space for meaningful conversations around a broad range of wellness-related topics with a special emphasis on our mental wellness. I'm your host, Dr. Ben Coles. Welcome to the show. I am thrilled to be back in the studio. I just want to start off by saying that. It's been a little bit of time for me away from the podcast, away from the studio. Some of that was intentional, some of it was unintentional. The backstory to that is that Greg and Seth have been exceedingly busy here. They did a ton of updates and renovation here in the studio, the whole studio, not just the podcast room, but everywhere. And it looks fantastic. Super new tech all over the place. Stuff I don't even know what it all does, but it looks really cool. And the Well Mind is a beneficiary of that. And I'm sitting in this really comfy new chair too in the studio. So that's pretty awesome. Well, that was during the month of August. They were doing a lot of construction and those kind of things. So I just kind of took that as a hard pause and stepped back. But you'll notice that the most recent episode of the podcast, I did also a video version of it. Now, the content really lended itself to a video version, and I'm not necessarily going to be just changing over and doing every podcast as a video-based format, but it's going to be a lot easier to do that with some of the new tech and setup. So I think I'll kind of mix that in as we're going forward. I'll always have the audio. You'll always be able to access it as you always have been on whatever service you're using. But the Bethany Lutheran College YouTube channel is a spot for me to publish those video-based ones as well. So that's pretty cool stuff. Then we had the start of the fall semester. So most of you know that I teach in the grad program here in clinical mental health counseling, and I get to be in a leadership role in that program. And it's just been super amazing getting that program started this fall. We had our residency for the program just recently. That means all of our students in our program were on campus for a 4-day intensive. It was so much fun getting to spend that time with the students, working on their individual counseling skills and supporting their personal and professional growth and development. And just fantastic. I also had a chance to do some traveling, which I talk about in today's podcast a little bit. I was down in Orlando, Florida, and attended a Christian Counseling Association conference. It's a huge, big conference. You can hear about that today. And then I also just got back from Atlanta, Georgia, where I was at a conference for counselor education and supervision. So that was it's been so busy. So it's great to catch up with each of you. I'll say that too. So this episode today is unique. It's a crossover episode. I've actually been hosting this podcast for a year now. I can't even believe that I'm saying that I've been doing this for a year, but it is true. And in that time, I've talked to amazing people and had some wonderful conversations and done some really cool things with the podcast. But this was actually the first time I got to be a guest on a podcast. So Gird Up podcast is run by Charlie Ungemach, and he's a young man studying for pastoral ministry. This is actually kind of a second career path for him. And he's got this Gird Up podcast that's really developing into a blossoming ministry as well. And he's going to be having a live event this fall, I believe, and he talks about that in the podcast. So just a ton of cool stuff that he is doing, and out of his own home. He's got a great little setup. We met over at his place and just sat in his living room to record the show, but it was super fun. And we talk all about men's mental health and social connectedness during a time when we are more socially disconnected than ever. So I hope that it's a useful and helpful conversation to the Well Mind community, and also introduces you to the Gird Up podcast community. So I think there's a good crossover between the content that he and I are creating. So I don't have a post recording for this. I'm just going to let his show play after this. If you like what you hear on the Gird Up podcast that I have here, please check him out. Shoot Charlie a message, let him know what you think. I know he appreciates that support and feedback. It was a great time getting to meet him and visit with him about a topic that I love speaking about in terms of anything that I can contribute to mental wellness in our community, especially in our young men as they're growing up and kind of carving out their own path here. So I will turn the show over to Charlie now. I hope you enjoy, and thanks for listening.
What's up, gentlemen? Before we begin, a friendly reminder that this podcast is not associated with any church, school, or calling body, and nothing we say here is meant to be perceived as the official doctrine, teaching, or theology of any church, school, or calling body. We're a bunch of dudes who love Jesus. We love talking about Jesus, and this is where we air out our thoughts, so don't take it as much more than that. I hope that this is edifying for you. Let's get started with the show. Okay, fellas, my name is Charlie Ungemach. I'm the founder and creator of Gird Up, and this is the place where young men learn to be the men that God created them to be. We're really glad to have you guys with us. This is going to be an awesome episode. It's going to be a great show. It's been a long time since I was nervous to have a guest on, and Dr. Ben was that guest. I respect him a ton. He has tons of knowledge and wisdom to share. And frankly, the fact that he came down here and sat in my living room and sat across from me and podcasted with me is a huge honor and a privilege to have him on. And so welcome to everybody who's here because they heard about us on the Well Mind podcasts. It's a blessing to have you guys as well. That's Dr. Ben's podcast, and he'll plug that later on in the show. I'll make sure to put in the show notes down below. But we're going to talk quite a bit about mental health today. And I will admit that as a young person, especially even up until being a young man, I didn't understand depression and anxiety disorders and things like that. And there was definitely a stigma attached to them for me. And it wasn't, like I said, it was something I did not understand. And things that you don't understand, you tend to judge very easily. It was a big turning point in my life and a big change and shift for me a few years ago when very close members of my community and my circle began to struggle pretty heavily with mental health issues. And then even I myself, in my first teaching role, had just crippling anxiety, like to a large degree. That I had to deal with and work through. And it's by no means like a clinical disorder or anything like that. But it is a real part of who I am and the way I'm made up. I get a lot of anxiety. And so the older I've gotten and the more experience I have and the more ministry that I do and the more people I interact with and even have intimate friendships with, the more I realize and understand just how big of a role mental health plays in everybody's life, but especially those who have something additional going on behind the scenes, that there's something going on in their brain, whether it's trauma-related or whether it's just the chemicals in their brain are not balanced appropriately. There's all kinds of different places that mental health issues come from, and they all need to be dealt with and should be dealt with love and compassion and kindness, and that's a huge part of who we are as men too. If we're gonna be protectors, if we're gonna stand in the gap for the people around us and bring order to the chaos, we need to understand the issues that people are facing and even the issues that we as men are facing in our own minds, in our own hearts. And so this is a great opportunity to sit down with Dr. Ben and talk about some of those things and make sure that we really have a good grip and a handle on mental health issues and what's going on around us and even some of the spiritual aspects of mental illness. And even if it's not mental illness, just making sure that I'm mentally healthy, because there's a gap between being mentally ill and not necessarily being healthy. There's a lot of room in the middle there, and that's where most people sit. So we're going to talk a little bit about that today. Before we get started with the show, though, got a couple things to talk about. First of all, if you're not supporting the podcast, we'd ask that you do. We provide this free of charge. This doesn't cost anybody anything to listen to us, and it's a huge blessing that we get to do so. We're very glad to do so, and you guys have been very generous with us, and the podcast is paying for itself. I'm no longer paying for this podcast out of pocket, but we want to be able to continue to do that as well and bring on awesome guests like Dr. Ben, and in order to do that, we have to continue to be funded. So You can do that in a couple of different ways. One, you can go on a website and donate a $5 cup of coffee. It's only $5, but it goes a long way to helping us pay for the licensing and the branding and the posting and all that kind of stuff. We need a platform. The other thing you can do is you can go buy a Gird Up t-shirt. Now, we're running out of adult sizes. The big adult sizes, like the people my sizes. But a lot of the smaller sizes are still available. So actually, I think we still have at least one t-shirt in every variety available in every size. But you're going to have to get on there soon and order them, otherwise they're going to run out. So go get your Gird Up t-shirt today. You can also donate on Patreon. And some people have just straight up sent me a check in the mail, and I'm okay with that. You guys are an absolute blessing to us. If you are not able or willing to donate monetarily, you can donate prayers, man. We need prayers more than we need anything else. God will provide for us. But we ask that you approach the throne of God on our behalf. It'll be a good way to practice praying too. Just get on the hook with God and talk about men in the world, this movement, the work that we're doing, the ministry of the men that are on the podcast, all those different things. The guys who are on the podcast all the time who are studying for ministry. Any prayers you can send up on our behalf, man, we would appreciate them. Second two things is that the Gird Up Men's Retreat is coming very soon. It's a Gird Up Collegiate Men's Retreat. It's going to be up at Camp Phillip on November 12th to the 14th. You can find all the information on the Gird Up website. I'll put that link down in the description below. Click on it. Go get your information. Get your ticket. There's only 50 spots available, and it's going to be a great time. We're going to talk a lot about purpose and legacy, and it's going to be a good one. You are not going to want to miss it. And the last thing, fellas, is we are now offering mentoring services or life coaching if you're looking for it. It doesn't matter if you're a young guy or an old guy. It's not necessarily going to be me working with you. So if you reach out to us and you tell us the needs that you have, we're going to do our best to match you up with somebody who can do a good job of advocating for you, helping you advocate for yourself, and helping you bring some order to the chaos, like I said earlier. So let us know how we can be of help to you, and we're going to keep being an assistance in any way we possibly can. Before we get started with the show here, I'm going to say a quick prayer. We're going to go into the intro, and then you're going to hear from myself and Dr. Ben Coles. We pray, Heavenly Father, thank you for bringing us together. Thank you for bringing Dr. Coles here to sit with us and to speak with us today. Thank you for the blessing that Dr. Coles is in his daily life, both with his family and with his ministry over at Bethany Lutheran College. We pray that you continue to bless lots and lots of people through his work, both now and in the future, as he continues to train people who are going to be helpers for those who need it and those who are in need. We pray that you guide our conversation today, that it might be one that is beneficial and fruitful for the people that are listening to it, and fruitful for both of us as well. We pray that we speak the truth boldly and speak only the truth, Lord. If it's not true, help us not to say it. We lift it all up to you. We pray that you establish the work of our hands for us. In your name we pray. Amen. You are listening to the Gird Up Podcast. This is the place where young men come to learn what it means to be a man after God's own heart. To gird up is an ancient way of preparing oneself for hard work or a battle ahead, and our work is to reclaim masculinity in the modern world and live out our calling as men of God. Here you will find a community of believers working hard to be the men that God created them to be. So roll up your sleeves, gentlemen, and gird up. It's time to get to work. Our guest today, Dr. Ben Coles.
Hey, Charlie.
Man? Welcome.
How's it going?
I'm living the dream, man. Living the dream.
It's a beautiful day today, so
It's
I'm
gorgeous.
really thankful for that.
It's beautiful.
Last week, when I was in Orlando, Florida for a Christian counseling conference, I was standing outside waiting for an Uber. I wasn't moving, and I was just sweating. I was just standing there sweating because it was like 90 degrees and 1,000% humidity. And so coming back to Minnesota here was a wonderful, refreshing change for sure.
Yeah. Yeah. What were you doing down in Orlando?
Well, so it's the American Association of Christian Counselors. It's probably the largest Christian counseling organization in the world. And every 2 years they have a world conference. So I don't remember how many different countries were represented there, but there was about 7,000 people that attended the conference.
Wow.
And they range from lay counselors, pastoral counselors, chaplains, all the way, through, licensed professional mental health people, social workers, psychologists, counselor educators, all of that. So it's a huge range of professionals, but they're all there to borrow your term, because they love Jesus and and they want to serve others. And so it's an opportunity for refreshment and continuing education. So I was there in my role as the clinical director for graduate studies at Bethany Lutheran College. We train clinical mental health counselors in our master's program there. So I was at AACC representing the college, talking about our program, talking about how we're educating our students from a Christian worldview in the profession of counseling, and then just sharing some good collegial time with some of the other counselors that I also work alongside at Christian Family Solutions.
Oh, awesome. Well, first of all, just tell us a little bit about Christian Family, or about CFS.
Yeah. So I've been a part of Christian Family Solutions since 2018. I joined them as a program director for child and adolescent services, and I was doing some adjunct teaching at Bethany Lutheran College at that time. And, the Lord had different plans, and so that actually ended up reversing as Bethany pursued launching a master's program in mental health. So then I stepped back from my full-time role at Christian Family Solutions, but I still maintain a caseload of clients that I work with. I provide supervision to counselors that are working on licensing. So that just means that they meet with me every week, review their cases. We talk about theory and practice and making sure they're taking good care of themselves, all that kind of stuff. And then I provide some consultation to the agency at large just on their practices of Christian integration with mental health counseling.
Awesome. So why do you maintain a client base just so that you are still in the field, or why do you, because you're teaching and you have a lot on your plate, why do you maintain a client?
Well, because I don't want to give up my professional identity as a counselor. I mean, that's why I do what I do. Everything that I do is because I just love working with people. And, my background is in ministry, and I decided that the ministry training that I was in was just too broad, and I wanted to be more specific. I wanted to be more, I don't know, I'll use the word in the trenches with people, and in a one-on-one kind of ministry. And so then I pursued counseling. So counseling has just been a huge part of who I am as a professional, and it means a lot to me personally, and I feel called to do that. So it's going to be hard for me to, if I ever have to give that up someday because of competing priorities or something like that. But right now, it's really valuable to me as a professional. But you're absolutely right. It makes me a better educator when I'm working with people in the counseling room. Still. It's hard. I've had faculty in my education that haven't seen a client in 10 years. So it keeps things relevant.
Yeah. So what exactly does especially if you've never really been to a counselor, it can be really confusing about what is a therapist versus a counselor versus what do counselors do?
Yeah, that's a great question, and there's not a straightforward answer to it. Just because there's so many different professions within the field of helping. So I use kind of helping as an umbrella category because that's who we are. Whether you're a social worker, whether you're a psychologist, a physician, a counselor, we're helpers. And I really stress that in the early education with the students in the master's program too. Your identity first is as a helper. And I think that sets people's mind in the right frame of reference as they are more apt to come alongside people and help them, rather than feeling I'm this professional that has to do something to or for the client or the person that I'm seeing. So it's really grounded in being a helper. And then some of the terms are really interchangeable, like therapist, psychotherapist, mental health counselor. All of those, I mean, it just depends upon, I don't know, the setting or my mood or whatever. But I think oftentimes people think of a therapist as more professional, and the term counselor gets used for lots of different things. I mean, you could be a camp counselor, or a school counselor or something, and there's just such a range. So being a counselor doesn't necessarily mean that, like I'm a licensed professional, but that is the term. Like in Minnesota, my license is as a licensed professional clinical counselor, LPCC. So the term counselor is right there. But therapy, counseling, it's all, I mean, like I said, that's kind of interchangeable.
Yeah. So obviously you have your doctorate. Do most counselors have that kind of advanced degree, or?
No. So you can be a mental health practitioner, kind of a skills worker, somebody that practices like certain behaviors or certain skills. You can do that as a bachelor's level person. So maybe you get your bachelor's in psychology or human services or something like that. But in order to be a licensed counselor, you do need to get a master's degree. So that's 2-3 years usually is what it takes folks to do that. And then there's stuff after you get your degree in order to work towards that license. But no, the getting a terminal degree like a doctorate is something that is really only necessary when you want to teach. And so that's something that was really important to me. It was encouraged when I got out of school. I was like, I'm never going back. I never want to sit in a classroom again. I never want to take another test. But after being in the field for 3 years, then that's when I went back to get my doctorate. So super thankful that I had that privilege and opportunity to do that, and it's definitely been a blessing for me and for the people that I work for and the people that I work with. The education and training that I received in my doctorate program was invaluable. So, but it's not necessary. A psychologist, they do need a doctorate. That's required, but not to be a mental health counselor.
Yeah. Okay. So, obviously mental health is something that's kind of come, like, maybe, I don't want to say it's come on the scene lately, but it's definitely been getting a lot more attention, especially Christian counseling, especially as you see, like, some of the developments in the, I don't know what the word is, in the mental health field.
Sure.
It's very much often not from a Christian perspective, and growing more and more so, it seems.
Yeah.
And so a lot of these things, I guess the perception is that in the last few years, well, it's also legitimately statistically true that, like, depression is on the rise, anxiety is on the rise, all that. So I guess I have a couple different questions. The first is, one, is this like a new phenomena that's developing, or is it like something that has been that way all the time and is just now being identified? And two, to what? Well, I guess let's answer that one first, and then I'll follow up.
Yeah. So the illustration that I typically like to use with that is actually a military one. So, you go all the way back to World War I, and they were having troops coming back from war, and emotionally, psychologically, physically, like, just really struggling. And there was this term shell shocked. I don't know if that's familiar to you, but it was kind of a common term used to try and describe what was happening, kind of referring to the head, like as our shell, and that it had been shocked by what it had seen and experienced, and then it was having all these kind of difficulties as a result of that. So even back then, and I mean, we could go way back into history, but I'm not a historian, so I won't do that. Of different descriptions of mental and emotional health and wellness and ailment, both of those. So, but from that military perspective, it was of great benefit to the U.S. government and the military to try and figure out what was going on here and try and keep these guys healthy so one, they could continue to serve, right? And two, so that they could continue to recruit, because if it's like, oh, all these guys are coming back and they're not really doing very well, I don't want to do that, right? So then that term shell-shocked transitioned into lots of other different terms over the decades, till we get to where we're at today with the Diagnostic and Statistic Manual. Refers to that as post-traumatic stress disorder. And we have a really pretty clear understanding of what that is, how it affects people, and some really strong evidence-based ways to treat that and help people. So you can kind of see there's this progression as we have studied, learned, researched, tried to treat, tried to help, to get more and more refined with that. Now, is PTSD more prevalent today than it was, say, after World War I or World War II? I don't have an answer for that, but a lot of times when we have language to describe something, the more clear we can be, then the more we see it, the more we recognize it, and because it's important, because we're paying attention to it, I think that's where we see more prevalence. Now, in issues like depression and anxiety, that we can go way back again in time, and there, the term melancholia was used to describe kind of this depressed state, this apathy, this emptiness. But again, through research, different models of helping, we've arrived at kind of a few different ways of describing people's emotional state when they're not doing well. And one of those is major depressive disorder. There's also persistent depressive disorder, bipolar disorder, all these different things. But again, as the language has gotten refined, I think we're better at identifying it. And then there's been a lot of advocacy around mental health to bring people's attention to it. But some interesting, I guess, content that I've been looking at and reading lately is really the rise of social media and smartphone use, and how that correlates with the increased levels of anxiety and depression in our youngest generation. And sometimes they get called iGen because of the iPhone, right? That's how ubiquitous it is. But yeah, millennials, Gen Zers definitely are like, and then the generation behind Gen Z, like we're seeing some of the, I guess, worst mental health outcomes. And I mean, it's scary to me. I've spent most of my career in counseling working with children and adolescents, and I've seen how much they already have to deal with in terms of, trauma, issues of neurodiversity, and how those affect their social relationships and their functioning in school. And now we've got these, these computers that they're walking around with in their pocket, that they have access to absolutely everything all the time, and a real decrease in meaningful social connectedness. So I think there's a lot of factors here that are contributing to just a general erosion of mental health. And so I think that's the best answer that I can give at this point, is that things are getting a bit worse in terms of our mental health and what we're doing, even in spite of all the advocacy and increased opportunities for treatment.
Yeah, well, you brought two things to mind, like as you were talking, is one, like I've heard that before too, and even the idea that maybe, and this is all conjecture, but maybe one of the big things, especially in regards to isolation, and going back to the PTSD idea too, is like in that day and age, especially on your way home, like you would sit, like after World War II, they kind of all just sat there in either Europe or Japan for a couple of months before they came home, and then you're on a ship, and then so on and so forth. And the idea was, like, maybe, like, just the fact that they're around other people who have gone with them through this whole experience, and now they can almost debrief each other on the other end. And maybe that is something that was helpful, but it speaks to the idea of being isolated as well. And both, like, with the military, I mean, you're in Iraq one day and you're at home the next,
Yeah, it really can be that quick.
Yeah. Or, even in just like daily life, like you're in a situation that, causes some sort of trauma, and then you remove yourself from that situation, and most of the time now you're isolated because you moved to a new, and it's becoming more and more difficult to make friends and more difficult to make meaningful connections. And one of the most terrifying things is like one of the I don't remember who said it, but a very prominent psychologist recently just straight up said the most dangerous mental health issue men face is loneliness more than anything else.
Yeah.
But it's just the reality that a lot of us don't have a close circle of friends, or even like we've got friends in quotation marks, right? But nobody that like knows our heart, nobody that we are intimately connected to.
Yeah.
Which is kind of an interesting thing to think
well,
about.
and time and time again in the research that I read, that continues to be published, like social connectedness, social support, and we can define what that means, is the biggest predictor of positive mental health, and really our physical health too, but mental health especially related to our social connectedness. And so the more connected we are, the better we do. And so I just presented an essay at a symposium for pastors, and in some of the research that I was reading, there was a recent survey done. I think it was 700, maybe it was 900 church leaders. I can't remember, but 51% said either they were feeling severely isolated or moderately isolated. And as pastors, these are folks that are around people all the time, right? That's their whole purpose, is to be around people. So social connectedness is not just about being around people. And I think it really hinges on what you were just saying, like having a deeper connection. And social media, Zoom and Google Hangouts, all of these things have been fantastic tools for us throughout this pandemic to be able to maintain our connections. But that's really all it's doing. It's like we're just trying to hold on to what we have. We're not really growing necessarily. We're not really building those relationships. And that happens in face-to-face, in-person, kind of like long-form conversations with people where you can go wherever, and that's the ground that provides an opportunity for self-disclosure and allowing yourself to be known to someone else and to know someone else.
Yeah, it immediately brings to mind, like, well, I say, being a guy who studied for ministry, right? Yeah, these are not the most comfortable chairs in the world.
No, we're good. We're good. I'm gonna raise this up.
But like, as somebody who studied for the ministry and very much loves and enjoys my brothers who are now in ministry all over the world, like I feel that, or you very much maintaining those relationships until you can be together again. And it's actually been really fascinating to me to watch, like, I mean, I've got 3 or 4 guys that I just refer to as my brothers. I don't have any brothers by blood, so they're the closest thing that I've got. And it's interesting to me how almost always the one with whom I'm in the closest physical proximity becomes the one who then is most dominant in my like hierarchy of friends, if you will, which is a real thing. We don't need to be bashful about talking about that. But and then it'll be like one of them will like come back to the state for a week or two, and then you see them and you're around them, and all of a sudden they shoot right back up to the top, and then you just like slowly but surely. It's really an interesting thing to think about. But what also was brought to my mind then was like especially like dating apps and things like that, and how easy it is to build almost a synthetic like intimacy with someone that you really don't even know. And sometimes it works out in the long run, right?
Yep.
But a lot of times it's really difficult too. And in our world of connectedness, I think that those not necessarily long distance, but even like moderately long distance, intermittent maybe relationships that depend so heavily on technology. I don't know. I guess I don't really have a question attached to that. It's just an observation of that it's becoming more, and it's a challenge. It's really proven to be a challenge for me.
Yeah, I've been thinking, I've just been thinking a lot about this over the past couple of years. And and I can say a couple of years now, I think, because I'm kind of referencing the pandemic, really, when I say that. Like, that's just created so many new, I'm going to rephrase that, not new, but it's heightened challenges that were already there. It just exploded them and really heightened them and made them worse. So we were already disconnecting in a intimate, personal way from people. We were already moving towards categorizing people in our lives based on what they're posting on social media, or who they're following, or what influencer, any of those terms. Like, we were already moving toward that kind of categorical and polarized view of people, and I think the pandemic really accelerated that, and we've been suffering because of it. So as it's been possible, I've just been really thinking about how can I be an encourager for connectedness in my own life, and then connectedness in the lives of other people. So I'll tell two stories. One, this is really what the podcast that I host, the Well Mind podcast, this is really the inflection point for me to decide to actually do that. So it's something that I've been thinking about. Similar to you, Charlie, I enjoyed consuming podcasts. Like, it was a favorite form of media for me because I could really curate a pretty broad and diverse range of topics and ideas and voices, and it was really informative and fulfilling for me to do that. And then I felt like, well, maybe I could contribute something, and I think that's kind of what you were thinking too. Like, maybe there's something that I can contribute here through sharing my voice and sharing the voices of other people. And so, this focus on wellness for me and promoting wellness in all aspects. I mean, I've had lots of different people on the Well Mind and all different backgrounds and professions and experiences, but a lot of it comes down to just connecting with people. And selfishly, I've said this too, I just enjoy talking to people, and the podcast gave me an excuse to do that. Right, to people that I wouldn't maybe normally get a chance to talk to, or people that I hadn't talked to in a long time. It was just a excuse for me to reconnect with them, or connect for the first time, and then start to develop that relationship, or deepen that relationship. So then the other story that I would tell is that this past summer, it was a very busy summer, as they can be, but busy in a different kind of sense, because I was working towards launching the grad program at Bethany this fall, and I did teach a class and those kind of things, but I was like, I need to get away. I need a little break here, and my family felt that, and we all felt that, and so my very best friend, he was the best man at my wedding. I was the best man in his wedding. We were roommates in high school. We were roommates in college. Just a long history together. We're very close, and he lives over in Michigan, and we just we have to get together. Like, we've gotten together here and there, and but it's like, let's actually get together. So we rented a house, just an Airbnb kind of deal, a big place, and they have a bunch of kids, and I have a bunch of kids, and so we just went and we stayed for a week at this up in northern Michigan, and just took little day trips, and sometimes we just hung out at the house, and it was just it was so good to just be, right, and just connect and laugh. And I mean, we didn't even have to necessarily do anything. We saw the sights, we had fudge on Mackinac Island, and did some kayaking and stuff like that. But it was, in addition to those shared experiences, it was just being together face to face, and that was so fulfilling and enriching. Like, coming off of that, it was like coming off a high. I mean, it was amazing. So those are two ways, I would say professionally and personally, that I've really tried to bring that into focus in this past year.
Yeah. Well, and I think, to an extent, I think everybody can probably get behind what you're talking about, right? Like, just being together and how important relationships and things are. But we're also talking about a whole nother level of that when you start going into a clinical practice, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so I think, in my own experience, I wasn't the most macho of men, but I played college football. It was all about the weights all the time. Like,
Okay, yeah.
I remember at one point, people are gonna hear this and make fun of me for it, but I remember at one point we were actually at like a men's retreat, and we were like chopping wood and stuff, like taking pictures. We referred to it as wife bait, like all that kind of stuff. Like it was, like just like and it actually kind of ties in with, so the last. As of this recording, it hasn't been published yet, but the last podcast, the one that'll come before this one, was all about Wild at Heart by John Eldridge, and actually the legalism that goes into that, and the idea of, you got to go into the woods and find yourself and all that. And we were just so gung-ho for all of that, and what that then, like, I think created in myself and a lot of the guys around is a similar mentality that you'll see in the older generation, or maybe even 2 generations before, like our grandfathers, right? Where you just like, there is no emotion, right? And it just kind of is like the emotions that there are more passion than they are emotion, and like you just, things get bottled up, and then you're like more of an attitude of dealing with them and moving on, right? And what we're seeing as far as like mental health goes is that's maybe increasingly becoming not enough, maybe? I don't know. Can you, I don't know. As a guy, it's really difficult sometimes to just say like, yep, I need some help figuring this out. And it's taken a lot for me personally, what it's taken is people that I dearly love, like saying to me either, like, this isn't okay and you need to, and not necessarily that I hurt them or something, but just like, yo, you are not okay.
Yeah.
Like, go get the help you need, or looking at me and saying, genuinely, like, you're not in a good place. You're struggling. You just need help. I guess those are kind of both the same thing, but
but you have people in your life, Charlie, that are able to hold up that mirror in a way that is meaningful to you.
Yeah.
And that only comes through like deep connection, because a person could put something on Instagram, and then there could be a whole bunch of comments like, oh, you need help, and what are you talking about, and like, things are not right for you, and are you going to listen to any of that?
No.
I mean, no. No. So holding up the mirror only happens in the context of a close, trusted relationship, and that's something that can't be manufactured, and it has to be cultivated over time and with effort and energy and a level of vulnerability. And I think that's what kind of the word that kept coming to mind as you were talking about previous generations of men versus where we're at today. And vulnerability is, I think, a big part, because in many ways, what it means to be a man is, it hasn't changed as much as people would like to think that it has.
And it shouldn't.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So I think defining what it means to be a man in terms of like strength of character can't be about, I keep everything inside and I don't talk about it, but that I am able to discern when and with whom I can share these things with in a way that's going to be meaningful to me. And I think that gets misplaced. And when we don't have those close personal relationships, it kind of like comes out in other places then. But then we're not in a setting where we can get feedback on it that we can receive. So in the absence of those relationships that are trusted and deep, it either comes out in terms of like depression, or it comes out in behaviorisms like workaholism or alcoholism or abuse of pornography, like, because we're trying to find this outlet and we're going to all these like very shallow wells and trying to draw from them to feel better, and we don't. So we need, like, more than anything, we need to refocus on cultivating those close personal relationships in our life. That's the starting point, I think.
Yeah. Okay, so I want to, first, how do we do that? Like, I know that's a huge open-ended loaded question, but like, where do we even start?
Yeah.
I mean, we're not just talking about, somebody you get a beer with,
Mm-hmm.
you're talking about building. I mean, you were talking about, high school and college together.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
it's not like you haven't seen each other since then, right?
Yeah.
When I talk
Yeah.
about my
Yep.
my brothers,
Yep.
like I'm talking about guys that I've got 10 plus years of, like, over that 10 years intimacy the entire time,
Yeah.
as far as emotional and mental intimacy and being available to each other. And again, technology has really helped with that to build those strong relationships.
Mhm.
That's not something that can happen overnight.
No.
So where do you even start? And if I'm find myself in a moment of crisis, how do I, like, yeah, I can just feel a lot of hope. I can just feel a lot of hopelessness in that, like, having been in situations where, like, I just need somebody to talk to or somebody to reach out to. And I've been blessed enough to have that,
Yeah.
but I can feel that hopelessness of, like, what if I don't?
Yeah.
Where do I start?
Yeah. I appreciate that. I just appreciate you sharing that, and also appreciate the question too, because it's going to make people pause and think for themselves, hopefully, first, before they listen to anything I might say. I hope that you just pause and reflect on that for yourself. Like, if you were in crisis, who would you go to? Where would you go? What would you do? Maybe you're in crisis right now, or maybe you're on the precipice of one. Like, what do you do? Where do you go? So my answer is twofold. One, in situations of crisis, you just have to reach out. Like, I don't care who it is or what it is, just reach out. Let somebody know. And if that means, calling a crisis line, if it means calling 911, if it means calling your neighbor, or your pastor, an old teacher from school or something, just reach out to somebody in some way if you're in that position. And that's where it's going to start. And you were kind of referencing this before, so I'll try and circle back to it and talk about it now. And that's going in to see a counselor, going in to see a professional. Everybody feels anxious about that. Whether it's your first time or your fifth time or your 100th time, everybody gets anxious about going in because, one of the things that I say as a counselor when I'm meeting with somebody for the first time, like, it would be strange if you weren't nervous, because you don't know me. I don't know you. You don't know how this is going to go. What are we going to talk about? What is this going to be like? There's, 1,001 questions, and you're here because you just need some help. And so the way I look at it is that first time sitting down with somebody is just an opportunity for me to get to know you, and for you to know me, and for us to say, what's going on and what can we do about it? Not that we're going to have all these answers. It's not, put this Band-Aid on and take this pill and do this exercise 3 times a week, for 30 minutes a day. No, it's just, let's just get to know each other, right? And it starts with forming a relationship. And that's so fundamental to who I am as a counselor. And I think something that I try and impart to the students in our grad program too is, you need to be able to form a relationship with this person. And it's a unique and special relationship that is different from any other relationship that they're going to have with somebody, because this is all for them. Any other like with our brothers, with our family, those are reciprocal relationships. It's a give and take. A counseling relationship isn't like that. It's just, I'm here for you, and I'm going to walk with you, and however long I need to walk or wherever we need to walk or go, we're going to do that. And so from a professional sense, that resource is available, and please take it. Even if you just go in for a check-in, maybe you're not doing so bad, but maybe you're not doing great either. There was a New York Times article that came out in the last year by Adam Grant, and it was on languishing. It was shared so many times, but it's a really good article, and it really helps clarify that our wellness is not categorical. It's not either I'm sick and I need help or I'm thriving, but there's a whole space in between that we fluctuate in, and it's fluid. And so this languishing kind of term that he used. It's this kind of gray, foggy, like, meh, I don't really care. And like, that's not a great place to live. So let's do something about it. The other thing that I would say is like a more contemporary example for me, as guys, we connect side by side rather than face to face more often than not. And I think we're face to face today.
This is the way the microphones work.
Yeah. But I think, this is unique. Most of the time, guys like doing stuff side by side, and that it's just creating the opportunity for connection. Doing that side by side thing doesn't necessarily mean we're going to get connected, but it provides the opportunity. So show up to something, like do something, be a part of something where you're side by side with some guys that share in something that you're interested in. And for me, when I moved from Florida to Sioux Falls, like I didn't know anybody. And I was in a new job, and I was starting a new educational program, and but there, after, I don't know, it was like being there a year or two, maybe, there was a new running store that opened up, and I was like, I'm going to go. They were having some group runs, and I'm kind of an introverted guy, but I was like, I'm going to just go. And, there was like 4 or 5 people. It was a new thing. And I started just running with them. And week after week, I just kind of kept showing up. And it was all new for them as a new store. And lots of people were coming. And then some would come back and some wouldn't. But through that time, I got to know some really good people, some brothers and sisters. And it all started with just showing up and letting myself be known, as well as trying to get to know others through that side-by-side activity of going for a run for 4 or 5 miles and coming back, getting some water and just chit-chatting, and then saying, I'll see you next week. Yeah. And I think that's a really helpful template that gets reproduced in lots of different areas. And we could talk about CrossFit. We could talk about all different like clubs and gyms and all of that. But it just starts with like, I got to pick something and show up to it.
Okay. Yeah, I love that. And so I talk a lot about like circles of friendship, and the idea that like you do need lots of people to be your acquaintances, right? Mm-hmm. And you're never going to have, close friendships without acquaintances. And you're never going to have intimate friendships without some close friendships first. Like it's something you have to build and then maintain, and do so very intentionally, mm-hmm. right? Yeah. I think that's a great piece of wisdom. Just a place to start. Yeah. Is just find something that you enjoy and you want to do, and other people want to do too.
Yeah. And now I've been here in Minnesota for a few years, and I kind of went through the same thing. Like I was like, I knew some people here, but not super well. And so it's just been a process. But let me tell you, Sioux Falls is only 2.5 hours away. And so there have been many Saturday mornings where I get up at 4:00 and I drive over and I meet with them and we run, and then we get some brunch, and then I come home. And it was 5 hours in the car for 3 hours of social time or something. That's worth that investment. Yeah. Absolutely.
Okay, so your podcast is called The Well Mind,
yep.
right?
Yep.
So the obvious question then, the low-hanging fruit here, is how do I know if my mind isn't well, right? So we're talking about all these awesome resources that anybody can take part in, like just having those close friendships. Yeah. And those are wonderful, and those are good, and they're going to do a lot of good for you, and are even going to reduce your likelihood and then even the severity of any issues that might arise. But it comes a point where that's not enough, or where you could use additional help, right? Mm-hmm. So how do I know at what point is my mind now not well, so that I seek out the assistance?
Yeah. So, I mean, you can go on, the National Alliance for Mental Illness. You can go to Mental Health America. There's countless top 10 lists of things that to pay attention to for your mental health, and like here are warning signs and all of these. And so, we can list those out in terms of like low mood and, having anxiety over things that, you're not maybe able to exactly pinpoint what you're anxious about. Like if you have a big speech coming up and you feel anxious about it, it's like, well, okay, that's normal. But if you just are kind of carrying around like this kind of tension and worry, and you're not able to say, oh, this is what that's about, like, that's a dashboard light. That's a term that I'll use a lot with people, is like when you're driving and like your check engine light comes on, that's alerting you to something. And so, but not everybody pulls over when their check engine light comes on. They're like, oh, it's probably nothing, or I just didn't get the gas cap on or something when I filled up. But then another light will come on. Maybe it's a low tire light, or maybe it's the oil light, or maybe, I don't know. I drive a Toyota, and Toyota is like, they are overkill on the dashboard alerts. Like just when I need to change my oil, 3 different things come on, and it's like, you need to take care of this right now. So because I think that's a recognition that when one light comes on, we don't really pay attention to it. I think the same thing is true for our mental health, our emotional wellness, is like we kind of ignore things. And especially, this was another point in that languishing article, is like when it's not so bad that we're like not able to show up for work, or like we just failed the big exam in my class or something like that, or like a relationship just ended. Like there are some big things that sometimes happen in our life that like shock us into like, oh, I have to pay attention to this. But generally it can be kind of this erosion that happens. And so I think having a good practice of checking in with yourself, and that can be physically, it ought to be physically, emotionally, spiritually, like relationally, like how am I doing? Where am I at right now? What are my feelings, and what are my feelings about? And what is my spiritual life like? Am I spending time in prayer, in devotion? Am I spending time in God's word? Like, am I doing these things, or am I not? And when I do them, what is it like for me? And so having this process of kind of checking in, and I call it self-monitoring, like just monitor yourself so that you are alerted to when those dashboard lights do start going off. So, if you're having like any big changes in like appetite, changes in weight, changes in sleep patterns, changes in your ability to remember things or focus and concentrate, that are like, I was able to do it this way, and now all of a sudden it's not like that anymore. When there are these big kind of shifts and something is now different, I need to pay attention to that and try and discern what that's about.
I've heard feelings described a similar way too, and this idea of like if you're not willing to feel your feelings, and I think there's a huge movement right now in like kind of counter the victimhood culture. You get books, and I haven't read the book, so maybe it's a good book, but you have books out there like F Your Feelings and things like that.
Oh, sure, yeah.
And frankly, like having listened to a lot of podcasts and things where those authors are talking, like they're probably not like that's probably not what they're actually saying. It's more the idea of like stop being a victim. But on the other hand, then we also do have a huge problem, especially with guys that are like really leaning into the machismo side of masculinity, right? Where you're like essentially any feelings or emotions or whatever start to feel like weakness, right? And that's like, so what you'll hear me say on the podcast a lot is feel your feelings, right?
Yeah, sure.
But using those then as a tool, like God gave them to you for a reason. They're not a result of sin. It's something you've been programmed with from the beginning, even in the perfection of Eden. Like they immediately felt shame, so they must have had emotion and feeling before that. If they were full of joy, anyway. But like not just like bottling up feelings and things, feeling those, and then figuring out if you can, like why do I feel this way?
Yeah.
Like.
Well, from like an emotional wellness standpoint, having emotional wellness doesn't mean only having positive feelings. Emotional wellness doesn't also mean turning off my feelings. And I've certainly listened to some of the new Stoics, and how they talk about things. Yeah. But emotional wellness is about first of all, just recognizing and being able to name what your feelings are, and then to express them in a way that's, I'll use a counseling term, congruent with the current situation. So if like I tip over my water bottle here and it spills on the floor, but then I throw the table against the wall and I start losing my cookies, like that emotional expression is not congruent with me just tipping over my water bottle. But also they can go the other way too, where I have a loved one that's really sick and in the hospital or something, and I don't really feel anything at all, or I'm like, oh, that's too bad, and then I just kind of move on with my day. That's not really congruent either. So being able to identify and name your feelings and then express them in a way that's congruent with the situation, and then lastly is to cope with them rather than be ruled by them, which I think is what you're talking about, or avoid them. Like, we just need to deal with them. That's the reality of how I'm feeling. It's a source of information for me. If we're created in God's image, and we see when Christ walked around on the earth and in his humanity, like, he had lots of feelings. And no, he didn't sin in those feelings. Those feelings in and of themselves were not sinful. A common, again, thing that I'll say is all feelings are permissible, but not all behavior is permissible.
Yeah.
Right. So you can feel however you want to feel, or however you do feel, like that's okay. But then let's talk about it. Let's deal with it, like, so that those kind of things aren't ruling you, or that you're not so intimidated by them that you just shut them off and avoid them.
Yeah. Okay. I would love to go segue here.
Yep.
Segue warning. I would love to dive into like social media and the things and the effects of that on a brain, but it's maybe we need to do this again. But the moving a little bit here, I guess, toward the mental illness side of things.
Sure.
And because that, it seems to be growing as well, at least as far as diagnoses go, right?
Mm-hmm.
So one of the things that I've noticed in myself, and especially in the guys around me of all ages, is a difficulty in recognizing and appreciating necessarily what's going on inside the brain. I think we all understand like the chemistry of it, or at least if you've got a high school diploma, you pretty much do probably. If you paid attention to class at least.
Hopefully.
Anyway, but while all of these like socially related issues continue to grow, there's another, and maybe they're not totally separate categories, but then you also have like the, I look at my own family and even the people attached to my family in a lot of cases. You have like even generational mental illness and things, and that's one of the things that is like, you look at both sides of my family, there's history of mental illness, so it's something you're really cognizant of, right?
Yeah.
But when I start interacting with people and even loving people, my friends and everything too, who have like clinical depression or have like anxiety disorders, or who have or maybe like a manic depressive or something like that, where they're up and down all the time, or I've had a few interactions with people who are like functional bipolars and things like that. It's really difficult to maybe understand and appreciate what's going on. So do you have any words for guys who just want to do a better job of not even necessarily loving those people, though that's definitely a case, but even just like working with them, not necessarily helping, even just like being alongside them? Like, how do you, if like myself personally, like obviously I've been depressed and anxious at times.
Sure.
That's a whole different thing than like having depression,
Yeah.
right? Or being socially anxious or whatever. So how do we, maybe best practices or something, like because it's so, I don't understand, because I've never dealt with it.
Well, there seems to be kind of two parts to what you're saying here. One is like from an outside perspective, kind of approaching somebody that maybe is at a point where they're struggling with, or maybe they're in a phase of recovery from like an acute mental health need, like approaching them. But then also, I don't know, maybe the other part you're kind of talking about here is like discerning when is my experience of mental health kind of cross over into mental illness. I don't know.
Maybe. I think even though, like, I mean, you get a lot of the conversations of like, well, why don't you just like stop feeling that way, or those kinds of conversations. I think is what I'm more leaning to.
Okay.
Or just like not understanding. Like I don't know what you're going through. I don't understand how you're feeling. I don't get it.
That's actually a really great place to start, though. Honestly, Charlie, like if you can take a stance of not knowing, because then that's going to help you be non-judgmental, and that's this is, I don't know if it's a fault of sin. Well, it is probably a fault of sin, but it's also a little bit just how our brain is kind of hardwired. Like our brain is really good at just seeing something and labeling it and like moving on. Like our brain doesn't like things that it doesn't know or can't figure out. Like that sometimes you'll see something out of your corner of your eye, right? And you'll kind of be like, what is that? And then, but as soon as you figure it out, like then you can just move on from it, right? So our brain doesn't like things that that are incomplete. And so we're really good at just kind of seeing something and labeling it and then moving on. But when it comes to interacting with other people, humans, that can be a really hurtful and painful thing to do. And you see somebody, you're at the grocery store or whatever, and maybe that person is having a hard time and they're really upset. Maybe it's a little kid that's having a hard time and is really upset. And you think in your head, what's wrong with his parents? Or that guy's a jerk. You think that like in a split second, like, so you have to call yourself back from that when you hear yourself thinking that and seeing that, to take a stance of, I wonder what's going on for that person. I wonder what's happened or what's happening for that person that they're struggling right now in that spot. Because then that non-judgmental stance paves the way and opens the door for us to actually have empathy for somebody. And so if we can take that, I don't get it, I don't know, and go a little bit further so that we're non-judgmental and we just see, hey, that person's having a hard time. I wonder what's going on. Maybe we offer a kind word, or we offer, is there anything I can do to help you right now? Like, or we can't get involved. Maybe it's not the right time or thing, but we stop and we pause and we pray. We just say a prayer for that person or for the people that are interacting with them, for that mom or that dad that's having a hard time with their kiddo. Like, then we say a prayer for them. Then that empathy turns into compassion. Mm-hmm. And we're acting in compassion rather than in judgment.
Yeah, I've talked about that too, especially with a couple of buddies, and a couple of things that have come up recently is, there's a reason the Lord tells us to pray for our enemies. Like, you can't hate somebody you're praying mm-hmm. for. They don't work side by side.
No.
Yeah, that's a good word. Maybe I think I want to lean a little bit more towards like people that we are connected to, like maybe sure. friends, family, that kind of thing. Mm-hmm. When they start struggling with, whether it's depression or anxiety, those types of things, maybe how do we love them best? I know that's a really broad question. Yeah. It's going to be person to person. But maybe what are the building blocks?
If I have any students that end up listening to this, they're going to love this. I'm going to say it depends. Because they hear me say that all the time. All the time, it depends. You know what? When I was doing outpatient counseling back in Sioux Falls, I would get parents of adult children, right? Their kids are grown, they're out of the house, they're on their own. Maybe there's a grandkid involved or something like that, maybe not, but their adult child is really struggling with, some addiction issues or mental health issues or both, and they're like, we don't know what to do. Like, we don't know how to love this person. We've opened our home to them and they've taken advantage of that. We've shut them off and they've ended up in jail or, in an accident or, and so it's like, we don't know what to do. And so like, I have just such a heart for those parents because at the end of the day, they're also kind of thinking, what did I do wrong? And so I think even as like within a family, siblings, it's like, what else could I have done to kind of prevent this or stop this from happening? That's usually a question that comes up at some point. And the vast majority of time, people are doing the best that they can with what they know at that moment. Now, there are definitely some times when people are, they're not doing the best that they can, maybe because of their own mental behavioral struggles. Maybe they've been abusive emotionally, verbally, something like that. And has contributed to that person's difficulty or struggle. So that's a different conversation about repentance, making amends, fruits of repentance, those kind of things. That's a different conversation. But when generally people are doing the best that they can to love their brother, their sister, their son, their daughter, their mom, their dad, whatever, it's going to be a mix of knowing where your boundaries are, like what am I able to do and what am I not able to do? What can I tolerate and what can I not tolerate? And that's going to be changing. Like, you can't have rigid boundaries. Some need to be super, super clear, so that people don't get hurt or you don't get taken advantage of. But boundaries are a starting place that can help promote safety in relationships and security. But then, we need to be flexible with those two and say, okay, I know I said I'm not going to give you money, but maybe I can help you out by paying for this thing or whatever, so boundaries are a starting point. But then the other part is like, if you're in a position of caring for or supporting somebody else that has mental health needs, especially if they're chronic, if they're just ongoing, like, you have to make sure that you are getting some support for yourself for that, because you're just kind of pouring out for that person. You're probably, it's like a parent with a child. Like, you pour way more into that child than you ever get back from that child, and that's the way it's supposed to be. But there are moments when, little Johnny looks up and you go, "I love you, Daddy," and it's like, all right, I got something there, but it's not a one-to-one kind of ratio. So when you're caring for somebody or you're supporting somebody, like, you need to have other people that are kind of in your corner and that get it, that are willing to support you and not judge you for being that support person for them. Like, why do you put up with that? Or, you should just write them off or something, like they make the kind of these blanket statements and you're like, no, I know it's not good, but I love this person. I care for them. So I'm not willing to just be done. So I'm really trying to kind of cover the bases here because it is such a broad question, but it is a combination of both knowing and having your boundaries and making those really clear, but also having some flexibility, but then having some people that are going to get it and support you as you are doing those acts of love for this person that's struggling.
Yeah. Well, but there's an overwhelming theme about what you've talked about. It's I don't know if fellowship is the right word, but community,
Yeah.
And having a community of maybe not even like-minded, but maybe like-mindseted people who are very much going to be, going to love on you as you love on everybody else.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
One of the, and I don't know, maybe can I segue?
Sure.
Is that allowed? All
awesome.
Right. One of the things, this is a comment. So I delivered this essay to the symposium earlier this week, and one of the comments that I got, because there was a question or something about brotherhood, and I used the term accountability partner, and that's something that comes up. I'm sure that's come up on your podcast at some point, right? In a variety of different contexts, and then and I was using that in reference to somebody really struggling with a specific behavior and really trying hard to change that behavior, but it has a lot of momentum in their life, and so they need somebody that they can just be honest with and reach out and like, hey, I had a lapse with this thing, or I'm really feeling tempted or struggling with this thing, or maybe I'm not struggling with it and I need somebody to kind of give me a good swift kick or something like that, right? But the comment was, I think we also need a Barnabas, or we need Barnaby in our life, I think is what the comment was. And that's, not just somebody that's going to help us be accountable, but also somebody that's going to be an encourager and somebody that's going to be a supporter. And so I think I just appreciated that comment because it, again, just reminded me and brought into clarity that we need balance in these relationships too. It's not somebody that's just showing tough love all the time, but it's somebody that can just be present for us and offer support, offer encouragement. And I think that's a really critical piece too. And so I don't know what the conversations in previous episodes of Gird Up have been about accountability partners, but that, something that I think is really important for us to have people.
Well, one of the things we have talked about a lot is the idea that an accountability partner isn't law. Like, it's somebody that's walking alongside you and also has like a similar vision for where you're going, right? So if it is pornography, like, you're going to talk about that and you're going to check in and you're going to have sometimes pointed conversations about it, and you better be honest with them. But at the same time, like, it's not like the only thing you ever touch base on or talk about is, your addiction.
Yeah.
You're doing life together, and you also make sure you talk once a week, and as a part of that conversation, like one of my, I talk about anything and everything. So when I was really struggling with pornography as an adult, because I kind of had different phases. And one of the things that, like, one of my guys would call me every Saturday morning, no matter what, call me every Saturday morning, and that was the first thing we talked about. Like, we'd have an hour-long conversation, and maybe the first 5 minutes would just be like, okay, tell me, what are you doing? Like, how's the, how is it? Have you done any of these things this week? What's going on? What happened? What were the circumstances surrounding all of that? And so, like, made me reflect, made me think, and also forced me to be honest. And then, like, accountability software and things like that, it only goes so far, but it is a useful tool in there too.
Sure.
They're like, hey, notice there wasn't any history on your computer for that day. Is that true? You didn't use your computer once? That kind of a thing. And just being able to push back and forth. And then there was usually wouldn't take more than 10, 15 minutes. And then you have another 45 minutes that you've blocked out to just, whether it's over the phone or in person or whatever, just to be together and build that relationship, right?
Yeah.
And it doesn't have to be like intentional relationship building. Just talk about life,
Yeah.
But the idea that accountability, yes, there's going to be some law, but if, like, accountability doesn't work if I don't want to change anyway. So no change works unless I want to change. Like, and this isn't always true, but I heard once, like, you're not going to make changes in your life until changing hurts less than staying the same.
Yeah.
And that's not necessarily true all the time, but like,
change it's a recognition that change is painful,
right,
that, like, that's not a comfortable thing when we're trying to make a change, even when it is for the good. But no, I hope that it doesn't always have to be that way, where it always is like, well, I don't have a choice, I have to change because this is so awful and terrible and I'm going to lose everything, the idea of, like, rock bottom and stuff. Like, I know that gets talked about in addiction circles, and I've certainly seen it, but boy, sometimes the bottom can be really low, and it's way lower than what you think it is. And so if you can have in your thankfulness and in your sanctified living, have a joy for saying, I get to work on these things, that's a much more fruitful attitude.
And that's the kind of the foundation of this podcast too, is that almost all men's ministry that's done in Christian circles is done, whether it's specifically geared that way or not, most of it is done for middle-aged men who have messed everything up and now want to make it right. And that was one of the big driving forces behind starting a podcast and a ministry now, online and offline, that specifically is geared at young men, like high school through young professional, college, all that, and helping guys get it right the first time. And so, like, we can just live a healthy life. We don't have to go to rock bottom. Like, if you never experience rock bottom, you're not missing out.
Nope.
It's not a place you want to go. And like, if we can, sometimes it's if we can convince, sometimes it's just like, if we can surround ourselves with people who also are walking a similar path and say, like, look, I want to be a good dad from the moment my child is born. I don't want to have a wake-up call when he's 10 years old and realize that I'm losing time with him and make an adjustment. I want to be a good husband from the moment, like, not from the moment we get married, from the moment I meet her. Like, I already want, recognizing that God says you're going to be accountable when you stand before the throne for what happens in your marriage, right? And that doesn't start when the ring goes on. It starts when your relationship starts, and then even recognizing what that means for your dating relationships and things. I want to be a good friend, and I don't want to find myself friendless and then have to make friends. Like, I have friends. Why don't I build those into something that meets my needs? And we don't put a lot of time and bandwidth into those ideas and those conversations. A lot of times, those don't start until the crisis moments, right? And then you're in crisis, you're either like, yep, I don't ever want to go back there again, or, making some padding for yourself of like, yep, so if this happens again, I need to have a structure or something, But we don't have to go through that if we can just build healthy habits and build a healthy life the first time around.
Yeah, and I really appreciate that, Charlie. And I think what you're talking about here is setting your intentions from the beginning, like with the end in mind. That's with the end in mind, you set your intentions for today. And I think there's a lot of power in that. Because I think, being a good dad, I was thinking about being a dad, and I was like, man, there are some things that I definitely don't want to do, and there are some things that I want to make sure that I do. And it hasn't been perfect, but I've set those intentions in my heart from day one. And I think this is somewhat common, but I was scared to death when my wife and I were expecting our second child, because I have one, and I was like, I love him so much. Like, how am I going to do this with two? Right? And it was like, no, just love just expands. Like, it does. It just grows, and I don't think there is a limit for that. And I have 6 kids now, and my cup is so full. It's overflowing in my love for them. But that really comes from setting an intention before I was even a dad. And so I that just really resonates with me, Charlie, what you said.
Yeah.
It's good stuff.
I appreciate it, man. I'm so glad you came down here. It's been fun. It was a pleasure to meet you too.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah. I'll have to admit, this is the first time I've been a guest on a podcast.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, I've only hosted. So
this was an honor.
This was a privilege for me to get to sit on this side of the microphone and not have to worry about any of the audio levels of tech, and just kind of show up and be with you. So it's been a real pleasure for me.
Cool. All right, on the way out the door here, go ahead and plug your stuff, man. Everything you're involved in, all the stuff you're doing.
Yeah.
Go ahead, and we'll put all these links down on the bottom too. So
sure.
If you hear something Ben says that you want to connect with, all those links are going to be down below.
Yeah.
But go ahead, Ben.
Yeah. So start with my role at Bethany Lutheran College in Mankato, Minnesota. We have a clinical mental health counseling program there. It's blc.edu/CMHC. That's a landing page. It has all the information. And we have lots of men and women going through that program that are degree seeking, but then we've also got some guys that are in there for continuing education, some pastors that are in their ministries, and they say, I want to know how to help people better. I want to know how to be more refined in the way in which I'm offering help as a pastoral counselor. And so they're there. So there's that website, and you can get information there. In terms of the podcast that I do, the Well Mind podcast, you can find that pretty much anywhere: Spotify, Google, Apple, whatever. I only have a couple of episodes on YouTube because it's pretty much an audio-based podcast, but I do have 2 episodes that are on the Bethany Lutheran College YouTube channel, and so you can find those there. But yeah, the Well Mind podcast, I've been doing that for about a year now. I try and get stuff out a couple of times a month. So that continues to be my goal. And then the last thing is Christian Family Solutions. There you can go on their website. I think it's christianfamilysolutions.org. And they have resources for marriage counseling, child and adolescent counseling. They have day treatment programs for more like severe mental health needs. And then they have all the way outpatient services. They have their member assistance program, which is all about their partnership with churches, so that members at the churches where they have the partnership can get free counseling. They get 3 sessions, 5 sessions, no cost to them. They can get a good assessment. They can get some good feedback and support. And if more is needed, then they'll problem solve with you there. So I'm one of the providers, and again, in a limited capacity, but they have so many good people. They're in tons of different states. And then again, that MAP program doesn't have any limits. So I know like there have been some called workers that are like in missions in Africa or China or something, and they get connected to a counselor through MAP. So there really aren't any limits or boundaries with how far MAP can reach.
Awesome. And a lot of schools work with MAP programs.
A ton,
right?
Yeah. From high school through college, there are typically counselors right on site in a number of the area Lutheran high schools and College of Ministry. They're on the Bethany campus too, and provide services at Wisconsin Lutheran College. And so, they have a fantastic presence in the school system as well.
Cool. Awesome. Well, Ben, thank you for your time. Dr. Ben.
That's good. Everybody called me Dr. Ben in the hospital.
Dr. Ben? Okay.
Yeah. When
Awesome.
I worked in the hospital. Well, I worked with kids, and
yeah.
It's a lot easier, more familiar for them to do that.
Yeah.
So,
Awesome.
No, it's been great, Charlie. I really appreciate you. Thank you for letting me on.
Before we go,
okay.
You do have a marvelous beard, right?
Oh.
So what is it? So I've noticed that a fair number of counselors that I've interacted with just happen to have beards.
Really? Okay.
Or maybe, I don't know. And there's also a little bit of a, what's the word? Oh, when you like assume things about, stereotype.
Oh, a stereotype. Okay,
of, like mental health professionals that, like the tweed jacket and the beard and the glasses. Is that like a thing? Or?
Well, I guess we have Sigmund Freud to thank for that because he was the father of psychological beard growth. But no, I sometimes I would get a hard time at the hospital from some of my colleagues for my beard, and like one of the physicians even would be like, "You look homeless," is what she would say to me, and I'm like, "Well, that's your opinion."
Yeah,
so
she's wrong.
Yeah, totally. No, So I don't know. I mean, I think it's just something that I've had for a long time and enjoy and all of that. But I don't know if there's a stereotype there. Maybe more of a professor. Maybe that's what it is.
Well, you got the combed over hair, not combed over, the almost a pump. I don't know, what do you call that? Anyway, good looking dude.
On that fantastic note, thank you.
Guys, we love you all. Thanks for joining us. Go be the man that God created you to be. We'll talk to you next time. On behalf of all those involved in producing, recording, and publishing this episode, thank you for listening to the Gird Up podcast. We hope it helps you along your journey to be a man after God's own heart. Be sure to check out the Gird Up channel on YouTube. There you will find many podcast episodes just like this one, but you will also find exclusive video content geared at helping you be the man that God created you to be by introducing you to other godly men, teaching you how to behave, study, dress, act, eat, and live like a man of God, and you'll find devotions to help you grow in faith. Please consider supporting Gird Up Ministries by donating on Patreon, shopping in the online store at girdupministries.com, or by making a $5 cup of coffee donation at girdupministries.com. Those donations help us make more great content just like this for young men just like you. Make sure that you like, follow, friend, and subscribe to Gird Up and our guests on Facebook, YouTube, and Instagram. Those links are in the description. And as always, we'll be praying for you on your journey. Blessings, men. Time to gird up and go be the man that God created you to be.